जमुना किनारे मोरा गाँव, सावरे ऐ जयो, सावरे ऐ जयो, जमुना किनारे मोरा गाँव, जमुना किनारे मोरा गाँव, सावरे ऐ जयो, सावरे ऐ जयो, सावरे ऐ जयो।
When the pandemic hit, it felt like the world stood still.
But we kept moving.
Making sure that healthcare workers
had access to the tools they needed.
That children had opportunities to keep learning.
That families had food on the table and jobs to go to.
But this is nothing new. For over 35 years,
thousands of Canadians
from coast to coast,
from all walks of life,
have come together
to act locally,
inspire hope,
and change lives for the better.
The World Partnership Walk
is an expression of global Canadian leadership.
We need that leadership now, more than ever.
This year, the walk will look a little bit different.
Join us on a virtual voyage
By registering now
at worldpartnershipwalk.com. Step forward.
fight global poverty.
Together, we can make a difference.
He is one of the world's influential Muslims, the spiritual leader of 20 million Ismailis, friend of prime ministers and presidents, and someone who rarely shies away from dealing with the issues that confront the world, whether they concern conflict, development, or religion. This week, to talk about all of them, he's our guest. Hello, I'm Peter Mansbridge. One-on-one today with His Highness the Aga Khan. You must love Canada. You keep coming back here.
I do.
Let me go a little deeper on that, because it raises a question you have often raised, and that's the issue of ignorance. You reject the theory of a clash of civilizations or even a clash of religions. You believe there's a clash of ignorance here on both sides of that divide. And you felt that way for a long time. I was looking through the transcripts of an interview you gave in the 1980s in Canada, where you were warning the West that it had to do a better job in trying to understand Islam. That clearly hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't happened, and a number of friends and people in important places have tried to contribute to solving that problem, but it's a long-established problem, and it's going to take, I think, several decades before we reach a situation where the definition of an educated person includes basic understanding of the Islamic world. And that hasn't been the case. And the absence of that basic education has caused all sorts of misunderstandings, but above all, the inability to predict statehood, international affairs, economic affairs are often predicated on the ability to predict. If you don't know the issues or the forces at play, the ability to predict is severely constrained.
What's been the resistance, do you think?
I think essentially historic. I think that the Judeo-Christian societies have developed their own education over decades and more. And basic knowledge on the Islamic world has simply been absent. And if you look at what was required education in the 80s, for example, I was a student in the US, basic education on the Islamic world was absent, even on general courses on the humanities, for example.
Is this a one-sided clash of ignorance? I mean...
No, I think there's ignorance on both sides, and I think very often there's confusion. I think more and more there's been confusion between, for example, religion and civilization. And that's introducing instability in the discussion, frankly. I would prefer to talk about ignorance on the civilizations of the Islamic world, rather than ignorance just on the faith of Islam.
What we've witnessed in the last couple of years, not just in this country, but in other Western countries as well, is what we call homegrown terror, where you see young Muslim men, educated, born in the West, educated in the West, who are moving towards, you know, a fundamentalist view, a militant view of Islam. Why is that happening?
Well, there is, without any doubt, a growing sense amongst Muslim communities around the world that there are forces at play that it doesn't control, but which does view the Muslim world with, let's say, unhappiness or more. I would simply say, however, that if you analyze the situation, I don't think you can conclude that all Muslims from all backgrounds are part of that phenomenon. Secondly, if you go back and look at that, you will find that a lot of the causes of those communities are people where there's a long-standing, unresolved political crisis. It's very, very risky, I think, to interpret these situations as being specific to the faith of Islam. It is specific to peoples, sometimes ethnic groups, but it's not specific to the faith of Islam.
Well, that must really concern you. Your followers believe in you, see you as a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, the same prophet that some of these minority fundamentalist militant groups hold up and claim as the reason they're doing the acts they're doing.
Again, I think one has to go back and say, what is the cause of this situation? With all due respect, if you look at the crisis in the Middle East, that crisis was born at the end of the First World War. The crisis in Kashmir was born through the freedom of the Indian continent. These are political issues originally, they're not religious issues. You can't attribute the faith of Islam to them. I think the second point I would make is this tendency to generalize Islam. There are many different interpretations of Islam. As a Muslim, if I said to you that I didn't recognize the difference between a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox or a Protestant or a Catholic, I think you'd say to me, but you don't understand the Christian world. Well, let me reverse that question.
I hear you.
یا علی مدد، خوش آمدید، بیenvenue. نام من ذهین ولجی است و به برنامه بازتاب شام جمعه این هفته خوش آمدید. به هر جایی از کشور که هستید، اگر در اینجا در البرتا یا هر جای دیگری از کانادا، به برنامه شام جمعه این هفته خوش آمدید. وقت این است که من قرار است در مورد چیزی شوخی کنم، درباره نقاشی پشت سر من یا مجسمه فیل‌ها، یا هم به شما یک نمایشی از دفترم که در خانه ساخته‌ام بدهم. یعنی همه کارهایی که در گذشته انجام دادم، یا شاید درباره این گل صحبت کنم. اما به جای آن تشکر میکنم که دوباره مرا در این برنامه دعوت کردید و این سومین بار است که من میزبان برنامه بازتاب شام جمعه هستم و میدانم که این بار میزبانی بهتری از شما خواهم کرد. یکی از دوستانی که از کالگری میخواست در برنامه بازتاب جمعه شب حاضر شود، به خاطر اینکه کیفیت کارش متوسط بود، او را دوباره منتظر گذاشتند. اسمش چی بود؟ بگذارید به یاد بیاورم. ناهید ننشی، یک جوان تازه کار که میزبان برنامه بازتاب جمعه شب هفته گذشته بود. شوخی یک طرف، این همه یک شوخی بود. به هر حال، طوری که موضوع برنامه برای ما کاملا روشن است، من میخواهم در مورد موضوعی که امروز که یک موضوع بسیار جدی هست صحبت کنم. میدانید موضوع امروز یک بحث بسیار مهم و جالب است، به خصوص در دنیایی که امروز ما در آن زندگی میکنیم و آن اسلام هراسی است. میدانید این موضوعی نیست که بعد از 11 سپتامبر ریشه‌کن شده باشد و اگر واضح و روشن به این موضوع توجه شود، این موضوعی نیست که از 11 سپتامبر شروع شده باشد. مدت طولانی است که این موضوع نه تنها آهسته جزء تاریخ امریکای شمالی شده است، بلکه به طور خاص در جهان غرب گسترده‌تر گردیده است. سخنرانان ما امروز سعی می‌کنند که موضوع امروز را آنچنان که است تشریح کنند. اجازه دهید تا چگونگی مبارزه با آن را پیدا کنیم، چگونه با این عدم همدیگرپذیری و تحمل به عنوان یک فرد و به عنوان یک جامعه مبارزه کنیم. نمونه‌های پلورالیسم یا کثرت‌گرایی وجود دارد که نه تنها می‌توان آن را علیه اسلام حراسی شناسایی کنیم، بلکه برای مبارزه کردن با تبعیض علیه افراد دیگر ادیان نیز بسیار مهم است. قبل از اینکه مصاحبه امروز خود را آغاز کنیم، می‌خواهم رئیس صاحب طریقه بورد دکتر کبیر جیوراج را خوش آمدید بگوییم. دکتر کبیر جیوراج رئیس طریقه و تعلیمات مذهبی شیعه امامی اسماعیلی برای کانادا است. ایشان به ما نظریات خود را در مورد این که امروز خود ما به عنوان انسان‌هایی که تلاش می‌کنیم دعا کنیم که به دین خود در این عصر همه‌گیری کرونا عمل کنیم، این هم شما و این هم رئیس صاحب طریقه بورد دکتر کبیر جیوراج.
برادران و خواهران عزیزم، یا علی مدد، همه ما در یک زمان دشوار و توأم با نگرانی به سر میبریم. بسیاری از اعضای جماعت ما سعی می کنند که اوضاع و احوال کنونی را به درستی درک کنند. الحمدلله با لطف مولانا حاضر امام جماعت ما در کانادا از حمایت یکدیگر، مؤسسات و دولت‌ها برخوردارند و البته که همه ما دائما در سایه حمایت امام زمان قرار داریم. در این شرایط عقیده و ایمان همیشه یک منبع قوت و آرامش است. جوامع هم به این معنی است که چگونه می توانیم از این شرایط دشوار عبور کنیم و بخصوص اکنون که با همدیگر بودن به صورت متفاوت و غیر معمول احساس می شود. اما با آن هم احساس با هم بودن وجود دارد. ایمان ما، وحدت و اتحاد ما به عنوان یک جماعت در این شرایط کاهش نمی یابد، بلکه چگونگی ابراز آن برای چند لحظه تغییر کرده است. در همین زمینه است که می خواهم برخی از تأملات را درباره عقیده و ایمان و تأثیر آن در استقامت و پایبندی به طریقه ما در هنگام سختی با شما در میان بگذارم. در مواقع خاص ما شاید نتوانیم به همان دفعاتی که بخواهیم به جماعتخانه شرکت کنیم و مثل گذشته برای دعا جمع شویم. در طول تاریخ دوره‌های وجود داشته است که امت مجبور شدند از مکانهای عبادت دور بمانند. در زمان پیامبر گرامی اسلام حضرت محمد صلی الله علیه و آله و سلم به مؤمنان دستور داده میشد که هنگام بارانهای شدید و هوای سرد شدید در خانه نماز بخوانند. از آن تغییر یافت تا به مؤمنان گفته شود که نباید جمع شوند، بلکه در خانه‌های خود نماز بخوانند. در این اواخر جماعت در سراسر جهان به دلایل زیادی مجبور شدند در خانه‌های خود و در خلوت شخصی خود دعا بخوانند. این عبادت شخصی در خلوت گرچه با عبادت جمعی تفاوت دارد، اما به هیچ وجه کمتر از عبادت جمعی نیست. در حقیقت برای یک طریقه مانند ما، عنصر جستجوی شخصی نمایانگر اصل اساسی است که ما کی هستیم. تمایز بین دعا خواندن شخصی با عنوان یک خانواده یا یک فرد در خانه و مفهوم عبادت جمعی در سنت اسماعیلی بسیار متفاوت است. در طریقت ما یعنی طریقه اسماعیلی، جماعتخانه مکانی است که جماعت در آن جمع می شوند. جایی است که ما همیشه به همدلی و آرامش می رسیم. این فضای مشخصی برای مسلمانان شیعی اسماعیلی است تا عبادات طریقتی خود را انجام دهند. اما با ناراحتی عمیق و قلب‌های اندوهناک مجبور شدیم در اوایل امسال در واکنش به بحران کووید 19 جماعتخانه‌ها را ببندیم. این هدایت امام عزیزمان بود که از راهنمودهای صحی در سراسر جهان پیروی کنیم. جماعتخانه ما مکان ایمنی ماست، آنجا خانه ماست و دلهای ما را برای جمع شدن به عنوان یک جماعت برای دعا خواندن با هم، جشنهای دست جمعی و یک جا چای نوشیدن تنگ شده است. اما فقط برای این که شکل همبستگی ما باید تغییر کند به این معنا نیست که ما نمیتوانیم با هم باشیم. ما همچنان در ارتباط با جماعت هستیم، همانطور که امشب در برنامه تأمل در شب‌های جمعه در خدمت شما هستیم و یا از طریق وبنارها، برنامه‌های سالمندان، بیت العلم و بسیاری از برنامه‌های دیگر به صورت آنلاین یا به صورت تلفنی. بعضی از شما سوال کرده اید که آیا می توانیم جماعتخانه‌های مجازی ایجاد کنیم یا عبادت‌های طریقتی خود را به صورت آنلاین انجام دهیم؟ اول همه می دانیم که هیچ فضای مجازی نمی تواند همسان با احساس تعلق ما که به صورت فیزیکی با هم یکجا می شویم باشد. علاوه بر این برای ما مهم است که به یاد داشته باشیم که تأسیس جماعتخانه یا هدایت تغییرات در عبادات طریقتی فقط از صلاحیت امام زمان ما است. در واقع در یک پیامی از ملک طالب رئیس مجموعه رهبران اسماعیلی که شامل یک تعلیقه مولانا حاضر امام است، ملک طالب چنین توضیح داده است: بستن موقتی جماعتخانه های ما سبب ظهور کانال های الکترونیکی و دیجیتالی و ایجاد یک جماعتخانه مجازی شده است. این کاملا نامناسب است، زیرا جماعتخانه فقط بر اساس دستور امام از طریق مؤسساتش و با انتصاب مکی و کامریا می تواند ایجاد شود و به فعالیت بپردازد، در حالی که بسیاری از ما ممکن است بخواهیم با بهره‌گیری از تکنولوژی بدون خانواده نزدیک خود با دیگران دعا بخوانیم که آغاز داخل شدن به قلمرو دعای جمعی است، اما نهایتاً این فقط از صلاحیت امام محبوب ما است که در چه زمانی، در کجا و چگونه می توانیم برای دعاهای جمعی گرد هم آییم. اگر از تعلیم درباره دین و ایمان ما یا در مورد انجام عبادات طریقتی خود صحبت کنیم، بیایید به یاد داشته باشیم که تجربه کنونی ما برای بسیاری از افراد جماعتمان تجربه جدیدی نیست. ما در تاریخ خود نمونه‌هایی از نیاکانمان را داریم که نشان می‌دهند آنها در مقابله با این نوع وضعیت چه برخوردی داشتند. اولین مثال مربوط به تعلیم درباره اعتقاد باطنی ماست. در دوران فاطمیان، اسماعیلیان با راهنمایی امام زمان در جلسات مجالس الحکمه شرکت می‌کردند. این جلسات غیر علنی در مکانهای خاص تعیین شده برگزار می‌شد تا شرکت کنندگان تعویلات دینی را بیاموزند و آنها را به عمل آورند. این مجالس فقط برای کسانی که با امام بیعت کرده بودند قابل دسترسی بود. حتی در آن زمان هم امام زمان، امام الحاکم بامرالله، در شرایط استثنایی این مجالس را به تعویق می‌انداخت. مثال دوم به آداب و رسوم طریقت ما می‌پردازد. همانطور که احتمالاً اکثر شما آگاه هستید، نسل‌های بسیاری از برادران و خواهران ما در تاجیکستان بدون جماعتخانه زندگی کردند، اما آنها از طریق به عمل آوردن وظایف دینی خود و یادآوری روزانه از امام و طریقت پنهانی در خانه‌های خود توانستند ایمان قوی خود را حفظ کنند. آنها بدون تردید برای دعا کردن پنهانی و حصول آرامش به باطن خود مراجعه می‌کردند. بگذارید ما از نیروی اعتقادی آنها الهام بگیریم و از این فرصت استفاده کرده و به یاد بیاوریم که امام عزیزمان اغلب به ما گفته است که طریقت ما یک سنت باطنی است و جستجوی معنوی و شخصی والاترین جایگاه را دارد. ما بسیار خوشبخت هستیم. هفته گذشته حاضر امام یک تعلیقه به جماعت اطراف جهان فرستاد. حاضر امام به ما یادآوری کرد که از شرایط فرزندان روحانی خود آگاه است و برای سلامتی، سعادت، امنیت و رفاه همه مریدان خود دعاهای خیر خود را فرستاد. آمین. اطمینان داریم که محبت و عنایت امام همیشه با ماست. بیاییم ایمان خود را محکم نگه داریم و مطابق خواسته های امام عمل کنیم و به جستجوی باطنی بپردازیم. سعی کنید با کسانی که تنها هستند و یا در حاشیه و انزوا قرار دارند ارتباط برقرار کنید. درباره دین خود بیاموزید و هر روز شخصاً و یا با خانواده برای بازگشت به ایمنی و مشکل آسان دعا کنید. آمین. بگذارید همچنان خوشبین و امیدوار باشیم. ما پیشرفت‌هایی از لحاظ علمی داشته ایم که به ما امید و اطمینان می‌دهد که به زودی به شرایط عادی برمیگردیم. الحمدلله با رعایت دستورالعمل‌های بهداشتی هر ولایت ما قادر به بازگشایی جماعتخانه‌ها در بعضی از مناطق بوده ایم. با این حال اخیراً با افزایش موارد ابتلا در سراسر کشور مجبور شده ایم تعداد اعضای جماعتی را که می توانند در هر روز به جماعتخانه بروند کاهش دهیم. لطفاً اطمینان داشته باشید که ما برای امنیت جماعت روش‌ها را از نزدیک تحت نظر داریم. این زمان مناسبی است که ما درباره نعمت‌هایی که در اختیار داریم تأمل کنیم، فرصت‌هایی که این زمان برای ما ایجاد کرده است را به یاد بیاوریم، با خانواده‌هایمان ارتباط برقرار کنیم و از زمان خود برای یادگیری، مطالعه و گسترش مهارت‌های خود و آمادگی برای آینده استفاده کنیم. هنگامی که من فرصت سخنرانی در لیلة القدر را داشتم، از یکی از سخنان حاضر امام در تخت نشینی نقل کردم که در آن امام عزیزمان به ما فرمودند و من دوباره اینجا آن را نقل می کنم. پیشرفت‌ها و تحولات سالهای آینده حتما مشکلات جدیدی را نیز با خود می آورد. ما نباید از اینها بترسیم. اگر ایمان خود را حفظ کنید و با روحیه فروتنی و بردباری همانطور که مذهبمان می‌طلبد با آنها برخورد کنید، حتما بر مشکلات غلبه خواهید کرد. این امر به ویژه برای نسل‌های جوان که آینده را به دوش خواهند داشت اهمیت دارد. فقط دین و ایمان نیاکان شما می‌تواند شما را حفظ کند و شما را قادر سازد تا هم در این دنیا و هم در آخرت در آرامش زندگی کنید. من برای همه شما امنیت، سلامتی، خوشبختی و مشکل آسان آرزو می کنم. آمین. این فرمان اکنون بیشتر از همه وقت حقیقت دارد. امروز ما به عنوان یک جماعت و همچنان به عنوان بشریت با چالش‌هایی روبرو شده ایم، اما با ایمان، امید و با برکت امام عزیزمان به عنوان جماعت کانادایی این دوره را انشالله متحد و قوی‌تر و امیدوارتر پشت سر خواهیم گذاشت. آمین.
خب با تشکر از شما رئیس برای اینکه نظریات فوق‌العاده‌ای در مورد یک موضوع پیچیده که چگونه ما به ایمان خود در این دوره همگیری عمل کنیم ارائه فرمودید. حالا وقت آن است که سخنرانمان را برای این برنامه بازتاب شب جمعه به شما معرفی کنم. میدانید این بخشی از برنامه را من بسیار دوست دارم. من اشخاصی را که به شما معرفی می کنم که به مراتب باهوشتر از من هستند و سپس با آنها صحبت می کنم و سعی می کنم به آنچه که می گویند ادامه دهم. این امتحان است از ابعاد مختلف که باعث خوشحالی ما خواهد شد، زیرا سخنران امشب فقط یک رهبر در رشته خود در بین جماعت ما نبوده، بلکه او در سراسر امریکای شمالی نیز یک رهبر است. آقای ایبو پاتال یکی از متفکران پیشرو در زمینه پلورالیسم یا کثرت‌گرایی بین الادیان در امریکای شمالی است. بگذارید وی را به شما معرفی کنم. ایشان عضو شورای مشورتی ریاست جمهوری باراک اوباما در زمینه مشارکت همسایگی مبتنی بر ایمان بودند. وی بنیانگذار و رئیس Interfaith Youth Core یا هسته جوانان بین الادیان است که یک سازمان غیر انتفاعی بین المللی مستقر در شیکاگو که هدف آن ترویج همکاری بین الادیان است. اخبار US News و World Report از او به عنوان یکی از بهترین رهبران امریکا در سال 2009 نام برده است. او همچنین یک محقق رودز است، چون که دکترای خود را در رشته جامعه شناسی ادیان به اتمام رسانده است. او چندین کتاب هم نوشته است که تازه ترین کتاب ایشان به نام ایمان است که راستی می خواهم درباره آن بعد از مصاحبه با آقای ایبو صحبت کنم. پس این را برایتان خاطر نشان می سازم که در ذهنتان باشد که بعد از مصاحبه با شما در مورد عقیده و ایمان صحبت می کنم. او همچنان در چندین انجمن و کنفرانس های بین المللی چون ابتکار جهانی کلینتون، کنفرانس تد، انجمن جایزه صلح نوبل سخنرانی نمودند. می دانید معرفی این موضوع و معرفی مکالمه من با آقای ایبو پاتال و یک پارچه فوق‌العاده موسیقی از هنرمند کالگری دکتر بیژن لالانی تقدیم می‌گردد. می‌دانید این قطعی بود که بیژن در سال 2015 در اوج عملیات تروریستی پاریس نوشت و ربط واقعی به موضوع امروز ما دارد. در حالی که ما درباره پلورalism و کثرت‌گرایی بین ادیان، اسلام هراسی و جایی که خودمان را در آن می‌یابیم، نه فقط به عنوان یک جامعه بلکه به عنوان افراد مدرن جامعه صحبت می‌کنیم. بنابراین بدون وقفه بیشتر لطفاً به من کمک کنید تا از پارچه موسیقی که توسط دکتر بیژن لالانی تهیه گردیده است شما پذیرایی کنم و به تعقیب آن گفتگوی من با ایبو پاتال ادامه خواهد داشت.
You were not me, so don't claim to be. Cause that label that hangs from me painfully, you were not me, should be plain to see. But you call out my name just so angrily. I know it's all scripted with victims, it's vicious. Give us your victims and call us the killers. You play the system to make us the villains. How can you kill a man and call it religious? Mothers, children, burnt down buildings, more scared of dying than they're thankful for living. You kill Muslims without any affliction. You attack Paris with no inhibitions. So swing swords, test our conviction. Call yourself Muslim or Jewish or Christian, but don't think we're foolish enough that we'll listen. When we lost lives, you lost religion. You can twist words and quote the Quran, but I know for sure this is not Islam. So the next time you go on and mention a God, pray for forgiveness and pray we move on. They are not me. Please believe. I live with intentions of peace. They are not me, though they seem to be. It's just what they want you to see. I'm a Canadian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a student. I love life, I love friends, I love music. I fall in love and girls drive me stupid. I want to live life to the fullest and truest. They want you to fear us, they want to divide. They want us to hate so that we pick sides, but we are the same, we are alive. And if we're together, they cannot survive. Only light can drive out the dark. Only love can quell the hate that tears us apart. We're brothers and sisters, so don't let them strip us of the humanity we hold in our hearts.
Ibu, thank you so much for joining me here today. This is a real pleasure to have this conversation. Let's start with a question that might be on some people's minds. You've been one of the most passionate advocates for pluralism, and particularly religious pluralism in the United States today. And some of the events, if I can just call them that we've seen in the United States over the past couple of years kind of spilling over here into Canada have kind of tested the robustness or the tolerance of religious pluralism. Do these developments kind of fill you with optimism of what kind could emerge on the back end, or where do you kind of stand on your current sense of hopefulness for religious pluralism in North America?
Well, first of all, Zain, Yali Madat, and thank you so much for having me. I'm totally thrilled to be with you, and I'm honored that you invited me. Thank you. This past week has been, joyous. And the way that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have conducted themselves, the language, the kind of the song that they have sung to the nation and the world, it's a song of pluralism. Embrace differences, bridge divides, enhance the areas of common ground, focus on shared values, do practical projects together. Let's nurture a common life with one another. That's the song that they're singing.
That's beautiful. You've opened up so many threads that I want to go down on, but let me get to the Obama side of things and your work for President Obama as well shortly. I want to talk to you a little bit about this intervening period we've been through, and I would kind of love to get your understanding or dissection as to how, with the tremendous amount of work done post 9/11 to try to bridge this divide, how you saw these fractures still present in 2016 that someone may have exploited politically, but what do you kind of think is the diagnosis, so to speak, of what has led to certain degrees to this rise of Islamophobia, coupled with the rise of anti-Semitic behavior at the same time, and sort of overall religious bigotry? Is there a diagnosis that you have in your mind that's kind of allowed these fractures that may have existed to keep being pounded upon by certain Americans or North Americans?
Well, I do think that there is a perfect storm of unfortunate events here. And I think the biggest part of the storm is a massive economic transition, right? From an industrial society to a knowledge society, from a nation where you could, make a living in rural America or exurban America to a nation that is really based now in cities. And there was an economic report done 2014, something like that highlighted that virtually all of the benefits of the economic recovery, the post 2009 2010 economic recovery, went to people with college degrees. The kind of famous study that showed that white working class folks actually had a lower life expectancy over the past 10 years than they had the decades before. I think it indicates that an entire way of life is gone. And there's not just economic dimensions to that, there's cultural dimensions to that way of life. And I think that that's probably the biggest factor. So I think that there is a structural transition taking place that those of us who are highly educated and live in cities and have knowledge sector jobs, we frankly paid very little attention to. And that's bad on us.
You mentioned your work, so let's jump into that. You're someone with some incredibly impeccable credentials that my parents wish I had. But you've Rhodes Scholar, you've worked for President Obama. But before we kind of get into those elements, what's driven you to this line of work? What's kind of driven you to kind of hone in on pluralism and then kind of double click into religious pluralism as kind of the strengthening sort of catalyst of society? I'd love to kind of hear what drove you to this particular path.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. So I wrote a book about this. This is the subject of my first book, Acts of Faith, and it's kind of the story to me going from being an angry activist around diversity work when I was in college in the early to mid 1990s to finding my way into kind of a hope-filled activist approach through religious inspirations, the first of which, as a young adult, were actually not Islam or the Ismaili interpretation of Islam. They were the Catholic worker movement and Abraham Joshua Heschel's vision out of Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. And then the more I kind of traveled that path, the more that I realized that within the tradition of my birth and within the leadership of Maulana Hazrat Imam and within the kind of character and contributions of the Ismaili community was a vision that not only lived in my bones, because I'd grown up, with salawat and dua and ginans, et cetera, but also a vision that was unbelievably intellectually inspiring. So in any case, Acts of Faith is kind of my path towards that. But this idea that, in the words of the great poet William Blake, we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love, and that love is defined by people of different identities coming together and building positive things together. Like that's just lives in my heart, and it lives within every pore of my body, and I just want to be involved in like making that real. And I love building things. I love building things, and this is what I've been building for 20 years.
You mentioned history there, so I want to maybe take a step back from talking about modern times to history for a second. What is religious pluralism as a historical construct taught us, whether that be from Prophet Muhammad himself and some of the lessons and the teachings and frankly actions of his or other historical figures of different faiths? What has history kind of taught us about the import and the necessity for religious pluralism?
Yeah, so you can make history do anything you want it to, right? And there are moments of religious domination in history, and there's moments of inspiring interfaith cooperation. I mean, I think that Rasulullah's time, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him, the Constitution of Medina, the decisions at Hudaybiyah, the standing up for a Jew during the funeral of a Jew, the sending of Ja'far to Abyssinia to meet with the Negus, the Christian king. I mean, and for me, there's a lot within the history of early Islam, the Prophet's time, that speaks to the power of religious pluralism. And there's so much else also. There's the Emperor Ashoka, there's the Emperor Akbar in the Indian tradition. There's, of course, Gandhi. There's Martin Luther King Jr. and him marching with Abraham Joshua Heschel and Selma. Heschel saying our legs were praying, King's nominating Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist monk, for a Nobel Peace Prize, the only person he ever nominates for a Nobel Peace Prize. So a lot of what I do in my talks is I tell stories of interfaith cooperation in history. And I think one of the remarkable things about the United States, even in acknowledging the sins and mistakes at the founding, was that this is the first democracy to believe that people from different religions, people praying to God in different ways, could come together and build a nation, right? It's the first attempt at a religiously diverse mass democracy. And that's a tradition to be proud of in the United States, and it's worth building on.
We talked about some of the bumpy roads that this religious pluralism project, if I can call it that, fairly call it that, has kind of unearthed throughout American history. But I want to kind of go back to a little bit more of history. When we talk about our current standing as Muslims in North America, this is not necessarily a first for us, if that's fair to say. And I should ask you, because this is something that we've struggled with, but it's also been something that other communities of faith have struggled with, whether you're a Catholic in certain parts of the world or Jewish in other parts of the world. So can you talk to us about, maybe as we look at the overall arc of combating Islamophobia in the Western world, what we might take from other historical cases of our brothers and sisters of other faiths?
Yes. So, geek that I am, I've actually written 2 books on this, Sacred Ground and a book called Out of Many Faiths, where I spent a lot of time comparing the contemporary Muslim experience to the Catholic experience. And, the great historian Arthur Schlesinger once said that a bias against Catholics is the deepest bias in the American people. And if you think about just how ugly anti-Black racism has been in the United States, how ugly the genocide of Native Americans has been, I mean, for a historian of Schlesinger's caliber to say that anti-Catholicism is the deepest bias is saying something. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's certainly worth taking into consideration. And Islamophobia looks a lot like anti-Catholic bias, which is basically making monsters of a religious minority that people knew very little about. Look, in the 1850s, the Know Nothing Party was an entirely anti-Catholic party. That was basically the only plank in its platform, and they had 75 members elected to the U.S. Congress. 75 members, right? Entire state legislatures were elected that were Know Nothing members, and it is worth pointing out America metabolized its anti-Catholicism. Joe Biden is a Catholic. He is part of a not so long ago marginalized minority. In 1928, a man named Al Smith, first Catholic to run for president of the United States on a major party ticket, his candidacy was tanked by anti-Catholic forces. In 1960, John F. Kennedy almost lost the presidential race because of anti-Catholic forces. Joe Biden is the first Catholic president since John F. Kennedy, the second total. And we almost in the United States never talk about what it took for us to overcome our anti-Catholicism. I take from this actually a great deal of inspiration that America has the ability to metabolize at least some of its prejudices. And I actually think that Muslims are because of the work that Muslims have done and other people against racism and Islamophobia have done, Muslims have made significant progress in the United States in the last 20 years. The number of highly public Muslim figures, the amount that you see Muslims on television and commercials and other kinds of shows. A friend of mine, Robert Jones, runs something called the Public Religion Research Institute, and he said in the last year is the first time that over half of people said that Muslims can be good Americans. This is in polling of a wide swath of Americans. I mean, I think because of the work that we've done, the future looks good.
Yeah, you make some really interesting points with the historical comparisons. And, I think I was reading some research recently, which you might be familiar with, and I'm sure you are, which was, the number one factor to kind of cool the temperatures on Islamophobia for certain populations was, did they know someone who was Muslim? Had they ever interacted with someone who was actually Muslim? And I think that kind of, dialed down the the othering or the mystery of what these, with this group of people that people kind of had associated with certain markers that they may have seen on social media or on particular television networks as being, stereotypically attributed to these groups. This reminds me of something very similar that I heard your fellow scholar Reza Aslan talk about in a talk I'd heard recently, where he was mentioning, how did we go from a 50-year period where, the amount of anti-Semitism was unimaginable to now having Judeo-Christian values? And a theory he posited was, in that case, the Jewish community was very strong and strategic, but also mindful of standing up for other people, not just ensuring that it was just their own cause or their own sort of quote unquote survival and thriving that they were standing up for. I just wanted to kind of get your take on that, since we're on that sort of historical comparators, to see if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no. First of all, Reza and I are friends, and he's right in a lot of things, and he's certainly right on that. I think it's absolutely the case that one of the reasons that we've progressed with regards to anti-Semitism is because Jews made it clear that they weren't just for themselves. And Muslims have done a lot more of that in the last 10 or 20 years, is to say that we are about building American pluralism and not just about advancing Muslims or the cause of Islam. By the way, building pluralism is very much a Muslim value, right?
Right. Tell me about, let's fast forward a bit to your time. You mentioned Barack Obama. Maybe I'll start with how you got to know Barack Obama as a fellow Chicago native yourself. What was the initial relationship like, and then let's get into the work that you do with them, and perhaps the goals that you had when you joined the council that was facilitated by him.
Yeah. So here's an interesting truth. I don't know Barack Obama at all. I shook his hand a couple times in the course of the time I spent on the advisory council, and in the course of time I spent working with the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Affairs. But I got to know one of President Obama's aides when he was in his Senate office, a guy named Joshua Dubois. And when Joshua was named the head of the Faith Office, Joshua needed to put together a faith council, and part of what President Obama instructed Joshua to do was to make sure that it was religiously diverse and it was generationally diverse, and there were some people focused on practical projects. And because I had met Josh literally once when he was in the Senate office, I guess I must have come to mind. And so the next thing I know, I'm in the Oval Office with the new president of the United States, shaking his hand under the picture of President Lincoln, and he is giving this speech about the importance of people from different religions working together and young people being involved. And I remember I had the temerity to raise my hand and say, President Obama, I run an organization that does precisely that. And he said, well, that's why you're on this council, and we're going to make sure that we do some practical projects together. And so that was the beginnings of the president's Interfaith and Community Service Challenge. But it was a lot of luck, honestly. It was a lot of luck. And I was, 30 at the time, maybe 32 that I got appointed. I just had no idea at the time how fortunate I was, right? To be in a White House, to be in the Oval Office with the first Black president of the United States, to be in the Roosevelt Room, putting a report on the table that advocated for a set of things, several of which became reality, to work with the president's political appointees on the advancement of a concrete project that built pluralism.
That's an incredible story, and also you're way too humble.
I'm not being humble. I just got lucky. You should do things with your luck, and I think that I have done things with my luck, but I just got lucky.
Totally. And thank you for sharing that like very personal sort of story of the inside look of being in that administration, on that council. Tell me about some of the work there. What was your, it was 2008, 2010, around that time?
Yes. The election was in November 2008. The inauguration was January 19th or 20th, 2009. I got the phone call maybe 2 weeks later that I'd been appointed to the council, and sometime mid-February, I was in the Oval Office, and then we had our first meeting, and off we went. I mean, so here's the big thing I would tell you, Zane. Sitting around the council table, I noticed that there were a set of people who were much more senior. I mean, I was the youngest person on the council by a long shot at that time. The only other person who was even close to me age-wise was the other Muslim, my friend Dalia Mogahed. So we're sitting around with all these senior religious figures. They had opinions on everything, right? On economic policy and climate policy, et cetera, and it became clear to me that I did not have the standing to have opinions on everything. But I led an organization that ran practical projects, that we had an actual concrete network of college students and college chaplains and college faculty that was doing interfaith service on college campuses. And that if I played my cards strategically, the White House could be a partner on projects along those lines. And that's precisely what happened. So I chose to use the limited airtime that I had in that council of very senior religious leaders to talk about a couple of concrete projects that my organization could help to advance. And because people got accustomed to me only saying that, they would turn to me after a while and say, yeah, you know what, we should actually try to make that happen. We could do that. And then we did.
Tell me about some of those projects, if you don't mind.
So, what the biggest thing that we did was the umbrella program was the President's Interfaith Campus and Community Service Challenge, and it brought together people from 500 campuses. What does the White House do? It convenes people, right? So we convened every year at the White House, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were interested or committed to interfaith service on campuses. And then we worked with the White House to develop a series of awards for campuses that were doing the work especially well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my organization basically staffed the whole thing. So I would say it doubled our movement, because all of a sudden the President of the United States is sending an email to every college president in the country, inviting them or their representative to a conference in Washington, D.C. on interfaith service.
That's awesome. That's really, really incredible. Let's move on to a bit around, maybe practicality for the Jamaat, right? People are listening. This has been a delightful conversation. Thank you again for having it with us, genuinely. It's been really illuminating to not just understand the projects you've worked on and kind of what's directed you to this career, but how you've rooted in historical sort of backing and kind of ensuring that we take some of those lessons of history and ensure that they're applied to how we try to collectively solve maybe the problem in front of us, which is to enhance the religious pluralism and ensure that we combat Islamophobia. If I'm sitting at home watching this as a Jamaati member, what sort of practical advice would you have for me? How do I kind of first dip my toe or maybe kind of jump in to maybe engaging with this sort of work of combating Islamophobia, but also ensuring a more robust religious pluralism in our two countries?
So I think that there's a set of kind of mental exercises we can do on a personal level. So, you ask yourself the question, what do I know about other religions that inspires me? We're going to disagree on doctrine. Let's just, that's a given. You're going to disagree on doctrine. What do you know about other religions that inspires you? Specifically, can you cite scripture? Can you offer can you cite a historical figure? Can you note a specific teaching? So just to that's what we call the knowledge base of interfaith cooperation at IFYC. And a lot of this is on our website, ifyc.org. We've got, cool videos and curricula, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things we start with is, What do you know about another religion that's inspiring to you? Here's a second question. Can you cite instances in which people from different religions have worked together in ways that have benefited all of us? And of course, there's kind of there's kind of grand ones like the civil rights movement in the United States, or the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, or Hind Swaraj in India. But there's also really everyday ones. So, for example, in disaster relief, right? Disaster relief, at least in the United States, and really in the international community as well, is an effort of a lot of faith communities who have created disaster relief arms. Of course, we as Smileys have done the same with Focus. And in the midst of a massive disaster, an earthquake, a hurricane, etc., those faith communities are working together. That is an excellent example of diverse religions highlighting a shared value, which is helping others and coordinating in very concrete ways to make people's lives better at a time when those people really need their lives to be better. So running through those kinds of things in your head, are kind of learning the knowledge base of that, very important. And then you ask yourself the question, what can we do? What can Ismailis be involved in at a Jamaati level that is interfaith in nature? And I think the answer to that is probably interfaith service, right? Is partnerships with churches and mosques and gurdwaras and temples and synagogues, etc., bringing people together to engage in service projects. It's, we believe in pluralism, and we are highly organized as a community, and service is a part of our ethic. Much of that service takes place within the community. A significant amount that goes beyond the community takes place through the Aga Khan Development Network. Is there a way that we as Smileys can build an infrastructure of participation in interfaith service efforts that is not just through the AKDN?
I want to hone in on this a bit more and maybe go a step further around maybe youth, right? People who are seeing your story and kind of what it's led to in terms of the projects and the trajectory, but also youth living in a very different time in our two countries, right? Black Lives Matter, a very public fight for racial and social justice. What advice would you kind of have for them as they try to maybe advance their careers or try to make this more integral into how they live their lives? So even if it isn't a particular career path, it seems to be so embedded in the zeitgeist that we're continuing the fight and the struggle on these items. What advice would you have for them and the energies that they would bring to the table?
I'm an incrementalist. I'm temperamentally moderate. Black Lives Matter is a movement that says there are huge parts of the system that are rotten and that need to change. And I stand in awe of their courage and of their victory over the summer, right? I mean, Black Lives Matter won. They won this summer. I'm in the United States because a radical movement called the Civil Rights Movement said that huge parts of the system are rotten. Why is that relevant to me? Because that movement doesn't just extinguish segregationist laws domestically in the United States, it also changes immigration law. And so you have the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965. You also have the Immigration Act of 1965, which ends legalized racism in U.S. immigration policy. Prior to 1965, the only immigrants the United States legally let in were immigrants that were, quote, culturally similar, white Europeans. The Civil Rights Movement helps to end that racist immigration policy. Hence, people from South Asia, from Africa, from South America are allowed to come in. We as Smileys benefit from that radical movement. Everybody from the Black Baptists of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to the Black Muslims of the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther movement. I am not saying that we have to be radical in that way. I'm only saying that we benefit from those movements, and it is high time we acknowledge that.
So what if there's a cohort within our community, let me thank you for being so straight up. A cohort within our community that says, we have seen the successes of history and religious pluralism and what it means in terms of value and in terms of what a good, just society can mean. But we've also seen a movement, literally a live wire movement going forward that has had a small v victory, but has shown how quickly and radically can take advantage of a moment. So the question I have for you is there any sense of using your term radicalism applied to how we combat Islamophobia, or do we have to do the incremental brick building in your mind? And I appreciate you telling me where you're coming from as well, and I think that's thank you for being honest with that. But I'd just love to get your take around how you maybe reconcile the need for now versus the long arc of history approach that we've discussed earlier.
So you are always going to need builders. You're always going to need, it is one thing to highlight how rotten a system is, but once it's highlighted, you need people who can build another system or improve the current one. And so I'm proud of being a builder. I'm not much of a radical. As I said, I certainly have that in my past, and I admire it in other people now, but it's not who I am. I'm a builder. And there's very, very few people in history who are both. So Mandela runs a revolution and he builds a nation. George Washington runs a revolution and builds a nation. There's not that many others, right? Gandhi ran a revolution and then Nehru built the nation. And of course, I'm only talking about kind of top level people here. But if you one of the great lines in Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton is from George Washington, winning is easy, governing is harder, right? So I am a governor. I'm a builder.
Well, that's fascinating. So many nuggets of wisdom in there. Let me end on these two final notes. The first one is you've talked about your inspirations and kind of where your ideals have come from around this work that you're doing. Tell me about Maulana Hazar Imam's words and writings and overall comments on pluralism and how they've impacted you, and both from how you approach the work, but to also the drive that it is meant for you and the work itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's central, his vision. I mean, I get emotional thinking about it, right? Like his vision, his patience, his ability to build, right? Laying the foundation stone at Aga Khan University in 1971, exactly 1,000 years after the beginnings of Al-Azhar. So there is a mix here between civil society and pluralism, and you have to build institutions, universities, hospitals, arts programs, economic development initiatives. You have to build institutions that model pluralism, and that's what he's done. And he is willing to be patient, right? It's a very special office. You don't get turned out after 4 years. You are able to work over the course of, in his case, 60, 70 years, mashallah. And you're able to think to yourself, what I'm building now will continue to be talked about 1,000 years hence.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the final question I have for you is maybe, getting you to paint a picture, right? We've talked about the struggles, the bumpy road that was this recent past in American history. Paint me a picture of what it looks like, a world or a society where we embrace religious pluralism, where we embrace this as a construct. What could that, if we're trying to end on that note of, painting that picture to someone who says, I don't really know if I understand the value, tell me what this could look like. Should we embrace these values and from your perspective, embrace projects that extend these values as a society going forward?
Yeah. So it would be woven into the fabric of our institutions, and the way you would know that is in our calendars. So, every Jamaat Khana, just like every synagogue and church and mosque and gurdwara and secular humanist society and Sangha, would have it just as part of its calendar on a weekly or monthly basis. Our diverse clergy have their meetings on Friday mornings, and young people have their interfaith service projects on Sunday nights, and there's a women's interfaith meeting on Saturday evenings, and once a month the mayor leads an interfaith service project, etc. Every campus has an interfaith service group. It just would be woven in, just like various majlises and Christialities are woven into the fabric of Jamaati life now. Similarly, you would just have interfaith efforts woven into the fabric of the faith community. And people would, people would be able to articulate their theology of interfaith cooperation. People would know a series of interfaith heroes. It would be part of the standard knowledge base and narrative of our lives.
And Ibu, what would you say to those, the growing number of folks that say they don't practice a faith, or they don't maybe have a faith to practice? How does that reconciliation happen in your mind?
I mean, they're part of this too. They're very much a part of pluralism as well. Absolutely a part of pluralism, whether they have decided to become secular humanist or whether they're on a kind of a spiritual journey. Pluralism is for everybody.
What a great note to leave on. Ibu, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this delightful chat, and I hope to do it again soon.
God willing. Thank you, inshallah. Thank you for having me.
ایبو از شما سپاسگزارم برای این گفتگوی فوق‌العاده و آن نگرش سخاوتمندانه‌ای که با جماعت در میان گذاشتید. میدانم که ما میتوانستیم این گفتگو را برای مدت خیلی خیلی طولانی ادامه دهیم. اما به هر حال باید اشاره کنم که ایبو موافقت کرده که دوباره با جماعت صحبت کند. بنابراین این دور تاریخ 29 دسامبر را مشخص و یادداشت کنید و یک پیام کوتاه کتبی برای خودتان ارسال کنید. به یاد داشته باشید که در تاریخ 29 دسامبر ایبو موافقت کرده است که بخشی از کتاب جدیدش را یعنی ایمان را به ما بخواند. این کتابی است که در مورد مبارزه با هویت، تقلا با ایمان و مسلمان بودن در امریکا صحبت می کند و این کتاب را در بین جماعت به خوانش می گیرد. تا ما راجع به این کتاب صحبت کنیم و در مورد بعضی مسائل از موضوعات بزرگی که در کتاب ارائه شده عمیق‌تر فکر کنیم. بنابراین در حالی که ما در رخصتی و لذت بردن از وقت ما با دوستان و خانواده خود هستیم، چرا که نه یک کتاب را انتخاب کنیم و در مورد آن صحبت کنیم و ما این کار را با نویسنده‌ای که در آن تاریخ 29 دسامبر مشخص شده است انجام می‌دهیم. ما به زودی جزئیات بیشتری خواهیم داشت تا با ایبو پاتال و کتاب ایمان آشنایی بیشتر پیدا کنیم. و حالا قبل از این که به پارچه موسیقی گوش بدهیم، میخواستم به شما یادآوری کنم که وقتی آن رسیده است که مشارکت خود را در برنامه تدفین تجدید کنید که امروز راه اندازی می شود و در 20 دسامبر ختم می شود. در حال حاضر همانطوری که بسیاری از جماعت می دانند، این یک ابتکار است که اعضای جماعت آن هزینه را به دوش گرفته و از یکدیگر در یک زمان دشوار حمایت می کنند و این یکی از نمونه های جماعت ماست که جماعت به دلیل کووید 19 با حمایت از یکدیگر قوی تر شدند. در حالی که ثبت نام در جماعتخانه ها به حالت تعلیق در آمده، اعضای جماعتی می توانند که با مراجعه به وبسایت iicanada.org/burialplan به صورت مسئول ثبت نام نمایند که از امروز شروع می شود. اگر شما نیاز به اطلاعات یا معلومات بیشتر دارید، می توانید با شماره تماس به 1-888-536-3599 به تماس شده و با یک رضاکار صحبت کنید. ما مشتاقانه منتظر حمایت شما هستیم و یادآوری میکنم که ثبت نام برای برنامه کمیته میت و مراسم تدفین امروز شروع می شود. بنابراین شما می توانید برای سال 2021 سر از امروز ثبت نام کنید. چون وقت آن رسیده است که برنامه بازتاب جمعه شب را مثل همیشه با پارچه از موسیقی خاتمه بدهیم. باز هم من زین ولجی خیلی خرسندم که میزبان این هفته شما بودم. با وجود این که نمیتونم شما را در آن طرف صفحه ببینم، امیدوارم که صحتمند و سالم باشید و از این وقت استفاده کرده با خانواده لذت ببرید و انشاءالله در برنامه بازتاب جمعه شب هفته آینده شما را خواهیم دید. مواظب و مراقبتان باشید و یا علی مدد.
की रित आयरी सजन